Hey class, so we are now on Unit 6, Urbanization. It's also called Urban Land Use Patterns and Processes. So today we're going to get started with 6.1, the origins and influences of urbanization. So these are the different objectives we're going to be going over for this unit. And for today, we're focusing on being able to explain the processes that initiate and drive urbanization and suburbanization. So some things that we're going to talk about today include site and situation and how that influences the various ways that cities grow. Also, how transportation and communication technology, along with population growth, migration, etc., also influences urbanization. So we have site and situation, and we have touched on this before. So within this context of urbanization, this is about how site and situation influences where cities are built, how they function, and how they grow. So for site factors, these are things like climate, landforms, availability of water and resources, soil fertility, and basically any other physical factor. So think of the physical location or the where of where a city is. And then situation. This is more so of context. So things like connections between sites, relative location can also help to help you understand functions of cities and things like that. So examples would be, so Cincinnati, this is a city in Ohio in the United States, is on the northern bank of the Ohio River and is a valley surrounded by hills with a temperate climate and fertile soil. So that's the site. That's just like the physical environment around it. Whereas for situation, Cincinnati emerged as a river port after 1911. River commerce reached its height in 1852 and stimulated steamboat building and industry, and specifically in pork. So that's like the situation, that's the context surrounding it. So moving forward, for factors that influence urbanization, we have transportation and communication networks. That is such a huge influence over how cities grow and where cities grow. So things like waterways, railways, highways, that provides that ability of movement for raw materials to get put into factories and then goods to get to markets, as well as for people to get to their jobs and to get to work. Prior to 1850, the location of all major North American cities was related chiefly to the presence of navigable waterways. So if there was a waterway, whether that was a river or maybe being on the port of a harbor or something like that, that was a huge reason why that place was there. The advancement of transportation technology has impacted spatial organization of cities, so the way that cities are organized over geographic area, led to the development of suburbs, urban sprawl, and decentralization, growth, and decline. So as we increase our transportation technologies, cities don't have to look the way that they used to. We have highways now, we have cars, we have public transportation that can get us from one place to another. So we're no longer restricted by having to be close to where we work or where we need to buy goods from. So the way that we see transportation and communication networks developing over time. First, streetcars. That meant you typically lived by the city center. Now we have individual cars. People were able to move out to suburbs just outside of the city. And now we have highways. So businesses can move and then people can move even further out since we have a higher speed connection. And then in terms of communication, we have landlines that gave people more options to be able to go places and still be in communication. And then cell phones and internet, absolutely international. 5G or whatever else comes up next will also help us with that connectedness. So we're just going to kind of just briefly touch through, feel free to pause on Bochert's epochs of American urbanization. So keep in mind, this class is very American centric. So here we have the first stage, and I'm going to move myself over a little bit right here. This is the sail wagon epoch, so from about 1790 to 1830, and this was dominated by boats and by wagons. So notice that the first cities were just clustered along the coast and just inland because of that technology. Then we have the second stage, the Iron Horse epoch, so from 1830 to 1870 more or less. This is where we start to see a lot more steam-driven railroads, steamboats, things like that. And check out these transportation networks moving out west. Now that there's that technology available, places are then able to expand and grow and urbanize more westward. Then the third stage is the steel rail epoch. So from 1870 to about 1920. So here we have transcontinental railways. So much longer transportation networks that are then able to connect so many more parts of the country. So then places were not as limited because of this transportation technology. Places like New Orleans, river cities, then started to decline. So there wasn't that need to be on a river anymore. Now there were rail transportation available. So we start to see population and industry growing and then thriving due to these situational factors, due to this context, not so much their physical environment anymore. Then fourth stage, we have the auto air amenity epoch. So that's from 1920 to present. Railroads decline, and now cars are allowed to have cities spread out even further. Air travel, definitely a huge game changer in terms of being able to connect places. Now we have airport hubs and major urban growth in the Great Lakes area here. Due to the automotive industry and Sunbelt cities. So just in general, main communication networks are historically the trade networks. So information used to pass along through trade networks, that's not necessarily the case anymore. We don't need to actually physically talk to people to have information get from one person to another. Communication technology like phones, computers, internet, then results in decreased cost of communication and then greater production. So new businesses look for locations that provide communication services, usually urban areas. And we start to see highly educated people living in urban areas near telecommunication hubs. So if we take a look at this here, we see that the share of residents in technical occupations with a bachelor's degree or higher by place of origin. We definitely have a high number of individuals in highly skilled positions, highly skilled workers that are able to work from longer distances because of communications. So population growth and migration. So we see a rural to urban migration, and that has been the case for a long time now. Now we have more than half of the world's population living in urban areas. As we can see here, this is the growth of urban population versus the growth of rural population, or sorry, I guess more of a decline. We're starting to see less people living in rural areas. By about 2050, it's projected that about 68% of our human population will be in urban areas. So other factors that deal with migration and population growth has to do with something that we call favelas or squatter settlements or slums. So these are characterized by a household not being able to provide one of the basic living characteristics. So that includes durable housing that's permanent to where climate conditions don't affect it. Also sufficient living space, so no more than 3 people per room. Easy access to safe water in sufficient amounts and at an affordable price. Unfortunately, that is not the case everywhere. And then access to adequate sanitation in the form of a private or public toilet shared by a reasonable number of people. So we do see slums or squatter settlements in different areas of the world just outside of main urban areas, and that is typically due to an influx of population. So once you have that rapid population growth, it's really hard for the infrastructure to keep up with that number of people. So we see this happening in developing countries that are growing quickly, that just cannot build, affordable housing or cannot build out their infrastructure quickly enough. It makes them vulnerable to natural disasters and also higher rates of diseases and issues like that. So favela, that's a Brazilian term. So here we see Rio, and this is the main city area. And right up here, we have some of their favelas or slums. So for economic development, sometimes a city's function will have an impact on its urbanization. So whatever specialty they have. So for instance, let's say Washington, D.C. is government. So we see their economic function revolve around government. For Houston, Texas, manufacturing and industry is kind of like the main function of that city. So being a center of oil and energy in Texas and in the US. For tourism, places like Cancun in Mexico, Miami, Las Vegas, that's like the economic center and the economic heart of that particular city and the way it grows. Services such as like Wall Street in New York being a financial center, that can also help to influence its growth. Government policies also do what they can to attract businesses and to influence that economy in a positive way through various things such as tax incentives and other types of financial incentives, industrial parks or places where we see more manufacturing and things like that, zoning for commercial or industrial land use. So that does have to be approved by government policy typically. Transportation infrastructure, so building out maybe highways or ports, things like that. Low crime, affordable housing, having good schools in the area, and then also things like entertainment and leisure can also help attract people to their area and also increase their economic viability. So we have something called forward capitals. These are capital cities that are relocated. We see this happening after a former colony has become independent. In all these cases, old capital cities were congested and they had limited infrastructure, and also the desire to build a new planned administrative center with improved infrastructure. That was like the main idea behind moving capital cities. So for instance, we see Brazil here. They commissioned a purpose-built and centrally located city, Brasilia, to replace Rio as their capital. So aside from like trying to move past some of their colonial history and kind of starting fresh as their own independent country, it is here, it's way more centralized, which makes more sense geographically for a country. And then also they can really build it with intent and in a way that serves their government. So that's all you guys got to know for Objective 6.1, and I will see you